I think we could probably get started. I'd like to introduce Tierra. Thank you so much, Tierra Williams, for joining us today. Um, Tierra is an activist, public speaker, educator, and poet. She's the co-lead of the 320 Coalition that I think most of you know about, the local grassroots organization seeking justice for Osage. And she's also the creator of Black Tea. So you'll all be seeing an exclusive episode of Black Tea today. It's a community engagement series with the goal of sparking critical dialogue in the community and addressing issues of racism, diversity, and experiences of Black people living in Central PA. So welcome, Tierra. And before we get started, I just want to also let everyone know that this is the third event in our Department of Geography, Activism, and Academia series. So we have one upcoming event after this on April 27th with Allegheny's abolition. I hope that you can all join us for that as well. And thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Thank you so much, Chanel. I really appreciate this series. I think it's very important to have something like this. And I was telling Angela today, I love alliteration. And when they said activism and academia, I was like, oh, I want to do it, right? And so I decided to call this exclusive clip Students, Staff, and Social Justice, because I had to follow their lead with that. Most people ask me why I created Black Tea. So Black Tea is something that has been in my mind for a while. I have a degree in speech. I have a concentration in theater, and I love being a part of the arts. But what I really love is activism. And so I wanted to figure out how can I mesh those two together. And then a lot of times after the protest, there were people that would come up. They would ask questions. They wanted to know certain things. And so I wanted a platform where people could ask these questions, where people from opposite sides could maybe have dialogue and to actually hear from the local community and local community members. What I've realized after doing this is that there are people who actually want me to go outside of State College and go out to Milheim and Harrisburg and go out further and actually expand it. So I'm really, really excited about maybe possibly having a season 2. Pablo Lopez from Dark Mind Productions is my producer. We got a grant from 3 Dots Downtown in December of 2020. And we started filming in January. And the first episode premiered February 6th through March 6th. We interviewed over 45 people. We went to over 10 different locations to get different video roles and all of that. And it was very interesting. I did not realize how hard it was to actually put a show together. I think I bit off a little more than I could chew at the beginning, but I'm so glad that it happened. And I'm really appreciative of the reception. We were featured in State College Magazine's March edition. So that was really awesome. And I just appreciate everyone who has been supportive. I see some people on the call right now who are actually a part of Black Tea and who are actually interviewed. And some of these people I wish I would have known. So next time I do it, best believe I'm calling Judge Tamika Lane and some of these people and Jaden and people who I didn't get to actually, didn't know actually prior to. So that's basically a little bit of background about Black Tea. Chanel told you about myself. The only other thing I want to mention is I have a 6-year-old son named Caleb. He's always beside me in the marches. He's the reason why I do a lot of things. And honestly, he asked me the hardest questions out of anyone, if I want to be honest. So he's a great inspiration. So before I wanted to start the video, what I wanted to do is have a little icebreaker question that I usually do. And if you've been on one of my panels before, you know that I like this game called In Case of Racism. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question and I'm going to pose it in the chat. Now, this question, all of you all can answer. And I want to know your honest opinion. Don't feel bad. Don't feel like you have to give me the right answer. Okay. So the question is, your history teacher is in front of the classroom and gives some incorrect Black history. What do you do? So all of you all who've been in classes or been in those arenas, I would love to know. Or if this has actually happened to you and you've actually done something, you can say that too. You can do this in the chat or we can raise hands. Either way, Angela or Chanel will call on one of you all. So that is the question. Your teacher is in front of the classroom, giving a lesson, and they say something incorrect. Anne says politely call them out on it. Anne, what does politely mean? Does that mean you correct them? Does that mean you tell them that they're wrong? Go ahead.
Well, and I'm on my treadmill because it's my lunchtime. um, I think you can do it really nicely and just say, I actually hadn't heard that. What I had heard from such and such reliable source was such and such. I think there's a way. It's hard when it's your teacher, you don't want to, and I'm not a confrontational. I feel I truly believe you catch more flies with honey. So that would be my approach.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I'm seeing certain things in the chat. Leslie Lane says share a quote or form a question for contradiction. So that's good. Sherry Metcalf says use yes and yes. That's what generally is believed. And this is the information that we're really missing. Jaden, I saw your hand raised.
Sorry, I I work as a TA. I actually have a class that I'm TAing right now, so I had to turn off my audio so you could hear me. The way I actually do it is I say, well, I read somewhere that it said this and that, which is probably where I would have learned the alternative source of information. I don't really like saying, well, actually, it's actually this. I don't like being that type of person, but I'd say I would source an alternative source of information, and then you'd probably end up looking it up. I think that actually might have happened once in a history class, but I think it was European history. It wasn't me who did it. It was a friend of mine who did that. I find that's a good middle ground where you're not being an annoying know-it-all in class, but you're also not being quiet also.
I like that point. And I also want to pose the question to not just consider incorrect information, but also a misrepresentation of how the information is being presented. For instance, sometimes I've been in classrooms where a teacher will say they took slaves from Africa. Well, that's incorrect. They did not take slaves from Africa. They took teachers, they took doctors, they took lawyers, they took humans from Africa, and then they forced them into slavery. So also just making sure that the terminology that's being used is very important when you're teaching history and when you're teaching about something as sensitive as slavery, or as I like to call it, the Black Holocaust. Does anybody else have anything on that? I don't want to not let anybody give anything. Okay, so this question can be answered by anyone, but it might be more relevant to those persons who have children of color. And the question is, your child is the only person of color in their class, and their teacher continuously writes them up. So maybe you've been in that situation. Maybe you've known a friend if you don't happen to have a child of color. But this is an interesting one. This goes straight into activism and academia, actually. So your child is the only person of color in their class, and their teacher continuously writes them up. No, silence, Kiana.
Well, I obviously has not happened to me, but did happen to my cousin, and I mean, it was happening all year, all year round, and she really just had to become the advocate for her child. A lot of the teachers and even some of the administrative staff was telling her that it's, she was making it a racial thing when it wasn't, and she would not back down, and then she fought for her son, and eventually when they did transfer class, he actually flourished and was doing better academically than he was ever with that teacher.
Melanie.
So the situation we've been having is not necessarily that my sons are getting written up, but that when other kids are throwing slurs their way, that my children are pulled into the office, that my children are taken out of class, and I'm not notified by the school that this has happened. So I plan to go to the board meeting, the school board meeting, and discuss what policies there are and what policies there need to be in regards to advocating for and protecting my children, because I think follow-up is certainly needed on a situation like this. And when the school doesn't even let you know, then what do you do? What is your recourse? So
That's definitely and it's so funny that you spoke up because you are actually in this episode, so they're going to hear a little bit more from you. um yeah, I've dealt with it a lot with my child, especially him just trying to matriculate. He was told he wasn't mature enough to go to the first grade, and so him and another Black student was also told that. So things like that happen, and it forces people to come into the schools and be active and be advocates in spaces where people don't understand. My son has attended preschools here where teachers say they don't know how to teach a black child, as if he needs a different curriculum. So that's another reason why I really wanted to be a part of this series. It was very important to me because I have been directly affected by it. I know people who've been directly affected by it. And racism within the school system is not just from teacher to student. It's also from student to student. It's also from on the history aspect. It also has a lot to do with whether or not people are cheerleaders or in different sports arenas. So there's so many levels. And here today, you'll hear about it from a teacher aspect, from a parent aspect, from a student aspect, as well as a theater aspect. So I'm really excited about you all getting ready to see this exclusive. And Angela can actually start it because we're about to go. Well, does anybody else have anything to say on that before I move on? I just want to make sure anybody gets to speak that wishes to.
Can I speak?
Yes, Mary Louise.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So my stepchild, when she was in kindergarten, she's white, but she came home from school and she noticed that Black children were being targeted more in her classroom, and she commented to us about that. And so we talked to her teacher about it. And so the teacher the teacher was very defensive, obviously, and was also currently enrolled in a diversity training program. And this was in Iowa. So I guess I just want to say that children are also aware of what's going on in the classroom and who's being targeted by teachers. And, Tilly was 5 or 6, I guess, at this time. And she was very observant that, that certain kids were being picked on more for things that didn't seem so serious and that other kids were doing. And the teacher in this instance, I guess, started a round table, like lunch hour, that was supposed to be special. And she would pick certain kids each week to come sit with her, including the child that she had been targeting a lot. And this was supposed to be a special thing. And then apparently throughout the course of the school year, it ended devolving into kind of a punishment for the kids if they had to sit with the teacher. But that was just, I guess that's all I want to share, is that, even if you don't have children of color, they are noticing who's getting picked on also. So it does affect everybody in the classroom. So thank you.
And thank you for saying that, because it's very important. Children are more aware than we believe they are, and then we think they are. And it's sad that it took a 6-year-old to point it out, but it also gives me hope for the future generations and the type of people that will be leading our future. And as long as we as adults nourish that, I think that we can, honestly, I might sound cliche, but make the world a better place, right? We have to nourish things as children. and correct things. Peter Buck says at Penn State, we sadly hear from Black faculty that it can be student to teacher too. And I'm glad you said that. A lot of these teachers are being verbally abused at Penn State, and it's just not okay and it's not appropriate. Leslie Lang says 82.1% of Black faculty members reported experienced racism at University Park and the Commonwealth campuses. So, and 56.2 reported they experienced racism from colleagues within the last 3 years from the report. So, it goes deeper than what people think, and there's a lot of hurdles that need to be had here, and it's not Happy Valley for everyone. And that's the point of Black Tea. That's the point I've been trying to make with the series, that not everyone here feels included, feels a part of this city, a part of the structure. One of the people that you'll hear from, she doesn't say it in this episode, but she makes a comment about theater, and it's Dr. Akila Kikor Franklin, and she says that sometimes her work, you know, all the theater work is like on this plate and it's the meat and potatoes, and her work is just seen as parsley, or her work is just seen as salt and pepper. And we have to get out of doing that to people of color and minorities that offer something just as much as anyone else, and we bring something to the table. I want to thank everyone for that. And right now we're going to watch the episode. If you have questions during the episode, I want you to chat them out because I don't want you to forget. And then after the episode, I'm going to answer those questions that you all put during the episode, and then I'll take Q&A for any other questions after that. But if you have a question and it's on your mind and you think you're going to forget it, I want you to put it in the chat. And if I don't answer it through the chat, I'll probably want to answer it verbally afterwards. Okay. So yes, we're ready. Thank you so much, Angela. Students, staff, and social justice. What does it really mean to bring activism into the classroom? How does one be an activist in an academic arena? Today, in this Black Tea exclusive, you will hear from students, professors, mothers, activists, and theater majors about how it is to have to advocate for social justice inside the classroom, for their children, themselves, and on stage. This tea has been brewing long enough. Lights, camera, activism. Good evening, welcome back, and today we're here with Dr. Cy Merriweather DeFries. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Can you just tell me a little bit about yourself and how you came to State College, what you do in the community?
Undergraduate degree, and then was strongly encouraged to enter the HDFS graduate program, where I received my PhD in Human Development and Family Studies. I then I live in State College, but I moved my employment to Juniata College and had the dubious distinction of being the first tenured African American faculty in the history of that institution. I was the first. I am happy to say that I am no longer the only. There are other faculty of color now on our staff there.
And becoming that, was that something that you had to push for? Did you have to tell me about the hoops and hurdles you had to go through to do
The
that?
struggle is real. I began as an opportunity hire. Everyone got excited to discover that I could fill a role there, and then they were less excited to discover that the person filling that role was someone who had a passion for social justice. And so it has been a continuous battle. It is now much less of a battle. We have an Office for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. We have many more students of color and support for students of color. But I must say, in the very beginning, it was a challenge because the process was not what the institution was prepared for. The thought was, we just say we have this campus and we will welcome students of color, and that students of color would come without any focus or institutional attention to the institutionalized racism that the students would encounter once they arrived. My campus is now well aware of those issues, and I must say I have a sense of pride in what they're attempting to do to address concerns that they were not eager to initially recognize.
Like my experience through the school system, if you had asked me at the time, when I was 16, 17, going through the school system, what racism did I see day to day around me? I would have had some trouble answering that because it's not something I looked for, not something I necessarily noticed. My friend groups didn't include a ton of people of color, so, I wasn't seeing it, and therefore, I think this is where the curriculum part comes in. It can be easy to think like, well, that's a past thing. I remember very distinctly getting the sense as I was growing up and learning about the civil rights movement, for example, the distinct sense that this is a past thing, and not just that it was a past thing, but that this was a mistake. These were errors. This was ignorance. That, well, yes, there were people who were bad and wrong, but we know better now, and that's not what we're doing now. And, now that we've learned and have decided to stop doing these things, not been made to, that just doesn't happen anymore, right? I never heard the term redlining until I was in my 20s. And we never talked about how that still continues in a more subtle fashion. The struggle, I think, of what does progress means. Again, a week ago was Martin Luther King Day, and I think it's really apt because it's the exact same thing that lots of folks now are complaining about on social media, which makes sense. The whitewashing of that legacy and all the quotes that I heard and that I knew. I heard how does it go? The arc of the universe is long, the moral arc of the universe is long, and it bends towards justice. I heard that lots. But there's another part, I think, not just to that quote, but to other writings, other speeches that King gave that talk about that it comes through struggle. It's not through nothing. And the sense of inevitability, that's by far the largest sense I got from the curriculum.
Have you ever experienced, or do you feel that there is racism within the curriculum?
Within the curriculum. So that's interesting, and I've talked about this before as well to other graduate students. In the sciences, there's this thought that racism isn't a thing, or we don't, because we work with numbers, we work with data, that there's no bias, there's no influence there. There's influence and bias in everything. And for me, I thought about, do I know any black inventors, any black scientists that are coined with different scientific techniques? I know about George Washington Carver. I know about Henrietta Lacks. But other than that, who do I know about? And even to this day, I'm still asking myself that same question. And at this point, once again, it's not something that I'm going to get from those around me. I have to do the work myself. I have to be intentional myself to go out and seek those Black scientists and seek out the people who are creating these scientific methods, because it's not coming from where I am now.
I think part of that is based on the fact that still today somewhere more than 70%, still bordering on 80% of the teachers in public K through 12 are white females, generally from middle class backgrounds. And so this, to normalize what is acceptable behavior based on a norm that is not representative of the community that you work with is, I think that leads to teachers beginning the pre-referral process towards special education. In the same breath, I think that in the African American community, there is a tendency and maybe even a propensity to identify the possibility that students who may have needs, specialized needs that will allow them to, if addressed properly, will allow them to fully access and engage the educational system, leaves us reticent or hesitant to accept that, because we identify that as a possible track to lead them to not being able to be successful. And so there's resistance at times, I think, in households when identification and or referrals may be necessary to help to fulfill those students.
So do I believe that racism is reflected in the curriculum of School of Theater? I believe, yeah. I think there's racism inherent in a lot of theatrical institutions. Schools are not exempt from that. I think that there's a heavy focus on Eurocentric teaching, both in style and in the actual material that's being taught. Theater history, for example, is a good place. There's been a lot of different ways that has been combated within the last semester or so in terms of changing certain requirements, for example, requiring West African dance into the curriculum, which is, I think, a great step in the right direction, but obviously there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in rooting out and decolonizing the curriculum.
I definitely believe that there is racism and white supremacy in the curriculum for the School of Theater. We have a very Eurocentric curriculum when it comes to teaching methods, acting methods, and theater history. We only just implemented West African dance as a requirement for all performance majors, whereas before it was an elective. You can see it in recruitment for the faculty and for the number of students of color in all programs within the School of Theater. It reflects the fact that Penn State is a predominantly white institution, and when it comes to productions, Black students are often relegated to playing their race. You know, they're forced to play characters that are often really traumatizing. That, you know, they're forced to play maids and people getting shot, and you know, to relegate an actor to only playing their race is to say that they don't have any place in the theater outside of that. And that's a really, really racist idea. So I definitely think that, just like all of Penn State, just like most institutions across the country, School of Theater has a lot of work to do to decolonize its curriculum.
I think in the in the educational theater world, it's very prevalent. Before these most recent semesters, you could just tell within that, because it was a lot of just white men that we were getting our work from. Professor-wise, but also the material itself. And it wasn't even different kinds of white men. It was cisgender straight white men. And so, you know, it's really hard to have a white cisgender professor tell you bring yourself to the work when it's also written by a white cisgender man, and then to have them be and this is how you do it. It's well, no, that's not, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you asked a really big question. You know, how does racism, how is it reflected in theater and in our everyday media? I think it's all over the place because we are where we are, and our country has the history that it has. And unfortunately, our country ignores that history in so many ways and tries to sanitize or erase the truth of how America came to be. It doesn't give us a true picture and a true understanding of who we are, starting when you go to school. You know, that begins in elementary school all the way through your university years. If you choose to go to a university, you are fed the same mythology of America. And so, yeah, and then we have a lot of stereotypes that continue to be fed into this theater and this media world, and that's a lot of what our students were trying to push back on, and that is the reflection of who we are when we're put on stage or when we're put in these very visible spaces. Is Black folk are more complex than just being hired help. That's true. There is a history of Black women taking care of white children and nursing them, rearing them, being the caretakers and nurturers. That is true, and that is a part of the history, but it's not the only part. And so what our students are saying is we want to see the broader spectrum and complexities and the dynamism of Black folk, just the way we see all of those complexities in other folk that are put on the stage. And so we have come a long way, and I think we have more work to do.
When they started school, especially out in Penns Valley, that was when we really started to have issues, and they escalated quickly during the year of 2016. The summer leading up to the election, everything intensified. We've had experiences where a girl called my son in 6th grade, called him a monkey, and the counselor called me, and the first thing she did was explain to me that that girl did not understand the racial implications, which clearly from the way it was used, she definitely did know. And also, that wasn't what I wanted nor needed from the counselor. I didn't need her opinion. I needed action. And I've never received it from the school district.
Do you have any opinion on that?
Well, I mean, Penn State is a predominantly white institution. It's here to serve the predominantly white population. I didn't come here for undergraduate, so I would say in undergraduate curriculum there are required courses, and I think that would be used kind of to see if there was a reflection of, history and things like that. Probably not. I wouldn't say I don't know the undergrad curriculum. Definitely, there is a need for diversity, which is non-existent in many programs. Even in the College of Education, I mean, there of course the presence of some Black faculty, some African faculty, other faculty of color, but of course they're a minority. And you face what you would face in any predominantly white institution: the structural, institutional racism. The lack of resources for different departments. So there's the African American Studies department, which has amazing faculty. But sometimes, of course, these faculty are often preaching to the choir. So it's those that are interested that will take African American Studies, and they probably already have progressive views, and they're most likely not racist, right? So the challenge is always, how do you actually address structural racism outside of those who already know that it exists? And that is always a problem. Like, for instance, the African Studies department is grossly underfunded. It's not even it's not even a department. It's just a program, and it's under-resourced. So even during the course of me being here, they actually moved the entire department to a small corner downtown. They said they were restructuring the building, and it was very offensive because it was very difficult for students to access that property. And, faculty, they face enormous challenges. I can't speak to that specifically. I'm not faculty. But as a student, we tend to just take care of ourselves. So there's important things to do. One is, do you spend your time addressing structural racism, institutional racism, kind of fighting the battle? Or two, do you just kind of find your own crowd and like protect yourself and be in an environment where you're healthy, because you have to go out every single day, and in your classrooms, in your teaching, in all the things that you do, you have to address that racism. And so, of course, we have to do both. And we've all had the experiences in the department, predominantly white faculty, and all the challenges that go there. But unfortunately, it's normalized. Like, I don't think anyone comes to Penn State like expecting to have an amazing experience. Like, if you wanted to be, unfortunately, that's how the United States is, right? If you want to go and be among Black people that will take care of you, or you won't go to a predominantly white institution, you know the challenges that you're going to face there. At the same time, you don't want to be deprived of the right to the education that you need to move forward. So you make these choices. We make these choices. We have to go to these institutions. We have to get the degrees so that we can do what we want to do in life. And then we know what that comes along with. It's part of the package. And that, of course, is uniquely for people of color, because a white person can go to any institution that they want and not necessarily think about that package, that they will have to address those issues.
So I think it starts off with a fundamental change in the material that is presented to students. I mean, from a really young age, kids are taught that when, the Pilgrims came to the Americas, they had a great relationship with the Native Americans, and that, that the Native Americans gave over their land so that the Pilgrims could, have land, which is a fundamental lie, right? And so from a young age, we are taught, right? We are, what's the word I'm trying to find? We are indoctrinated. That's right. So from a young age, we are taught, we are indoctrinated that the inception of our country doesn't have a bad history. And that's not true. And we are doing a disservice to Black people, to brown people, to indigenous people by not teaching the real way that this country started. Because the real way it started has a direct effect on the current issues that we are experiencing. And so if kids are going through their entire K through 12 education and not learning about these social problems, right, until they get maybe to college, if they decide to go to college, that is an entire unlearning process that people have to go through. And so, an entire socialization process that they now have to reject if they want to, in order to be aware of the actual issues that are affecting our country. And so from the start, we need to be revising curricula. We need to make sure that we are not using textbooks that say that whitewash the actual history of this country. And then I also think that the fact that there are officers in schools and the school to prison pipeline makes it even worse for Black and brown students to do well in school. I mean, if your first encounter as a Black student is with a police officer when you are in 3rd grade and they throw you in a juvenile detention center, or you start with a record at that young age, right? Maybe not that young, but a little older. What that is doing is it's priming that student to continue to be part of the system that is designed to keep them wrapped up in that system from the moment they enter it. And so having police officers in schools is fundamentally racist. It is fundamentally there to, even though it seems to be a matter of public safety and safety of the students, what it ends up doing is it ends up silencing and, the voices of Black and brown students. And so I think that it's the representation of people, of our teachers, right, also needs to change. But those are all problems with a system. It's all problems with the system that prevents Black people, right, that prevents brown people from entering spaces in which they could become teachers, right, in which they could become curriculum educators, right, in which they could become, superintendents of schools. And so all of that history is kind of wrapped up in all the history of this country is wrapped up in the reasons why we don't see that representation.
And now, an exclusive clip from What's the Tea? White people do something I call over-speaking. They use a lot of nuances in their terminology. So they say things that sound good, but they're really not. And if you aren't truly versed in the English language and haven't been in those spaces, you don't even know someone's being offensive. Like, my sister moved here, and one woman came up to her and said, "Oh, you have some beautiful pickaninnies in your hair." So she didn't understand what was happening. See, but if you don't understand all nuances of the words, if you don't understand that the word spook is racist, if you don't get that, then you don't mind when you walk into a school and you see spook on somebody's door for Halloween. You just pass by and you don't think twice about it, right? Because you don't really truly understand what these people are trying to say. And so that's why I watch white racist comedy. I watch it on purpose so I can know when someone is being offensive to me. I can catch it immediately. You're not going to be able to go past me with your racism, with your implicit bias, with your microaggression. You're not going to be able to get past me with it, because I truly believe, the art of war. I have to study my enemy. I have to know how my enemy thinks. And I'm not saying all white people are my enemy, but white racists and white supremacists are definitely my enemy. And if you are living under a white supremacist module, or you are carrying out white supremacy and maybe you don't even realize it, you are still a part of that system. And so you'll still say things like, "Oh, Tierra, you're so articulate." What? Do you tell white people that? See, that kind of thing, those kind of nuances, it's like, what? I was working at some places, what woman told me, "You're very intimidating." I said, "Why?" "Well, I said, "Well, have I ever said anything that intimidated you?" She was like, "Well, no." I said, "Have you ever heard me yell?" "Well, no." I'm 5'2", 136 pounds. How am I intimidating? Thank you. Thank you so much. I am so glad that you guys were able to sit here. I want to read something that Jaden put in the chat. He says, "This is something I've noticed not only in theater, but also in TV and movies. And the people of color actors are often regulated to playing their ethnicity roles specify Asian American or African American, etc., which on one hand is good for representation, but also when the ethnicity of the character isn't specified in the roles, often go to white people and the person of color actors aren't considered," which is very true. I want to give anybody any chance to tell me anything that they noticed, anything that they took away, or any questions that they have about that episode. And again, I want to thank everybody who was a part of that episode. A lot of you all were here that were actually on that episode, like Nanray and Maggie and Melanie. So I would like for you guys to speak as being a part of it as well. But I want questions from the audience, and this is that opportunity. Let's see, Zach. Let's see, what does Zach say? What drew you into investigating racism in theater? Why was that a priority? Okay, well, Zach, as I said, I'm a theater major, and I've experienced racism in theater personally. But honestly, when I was in high school, I was a part of the speech and debate group where we participated and we did prose and we did poetry and we did all these competition style things. And I was told by my coach that I was not going to win if I continued to do Black pieces. So from then on out, I only did Black pieces or pieces about Black people or pieces written by Black authors. And I ended up winning state that year, first place in state overall. And I ended up going to nationals the next year and placed 9th in the nation in Albany, New York. So I personally have experienced it. I think it's interesting when you look at the curriculum. Like I attended an HBCU, Jackson State University, and we had to do Antigone. So I don't understand why Penn State doesn't have to do fences, or they don't have to do a Raisin in the Sun, right? So it's just that kind of thing when you look at theater and you look at the fact that there are only certain roles. I've turned down roles because I felt like my acting was minimized because of the role this person was offering me when I knew that I was a better actor than someone else. But because maybe they didn't want a Black wife and a white husband or something of that sort in the play, then I wasn't casted. So I've personally experienced it. And when you look at the two interview groups from theater that I interviewed, was one, the Black boy who thought he had it all, was a story written and composed by Jalen Martin, who in the entire story explains his experience at Penn State and all of the racism that he has dealt with. So that literally what his piece was about. And the second was the Osaze Project, which was written and directed by Charles Dumas in honor of Osaze Osage telling his story. So both of those pieces actually had to deal with activism and had to deal with racism. And so that's why it was really easy for me to think about that and add that into there. More questions? I'm ready. Don't be shy. Or comments. It doesn't have to be a question. No, everybody's getting silent. Oh, Peter Buck. Okay, there we go.
So, well, thank you. This was really good, and as you know, I'm running for the school board, and last night there was a discussion about the school resource officer that was on the agenda, and I know that's a sort of hot button topic, and that's, so we're talking about schools and activism, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on school resource officers. You have a 6-year-old boy, I'm thinking about, him. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I don't approve of officers being in the school. I think there should be at least 15 different alternatives that could actually happen aside from an officer handling a student. I believe Maggie said it best in the film. It's fundamentally racist because you know that you're going to be targeted, and due to the training of officers, unfortunately, it's obviously biased the way officers are being trained in this community. And when we think about officers in the school, it just brings up what just recently happened almost a week ago, not even maybe, in Tennessee, where a young Black man is shot in the schools. And at first they're saying he had a gun, and now the story's coming out like, oh, maybe he didn't have a gun. But the fact of the matter is he was shot in school by an officer, right? There was a school shooting by an officer in a school where he was supposed to be there to de-escalate. I'm guessing. I don't know what the other reason. And why does he have a gun in the school? Like, it doesn't even add up to me. So I am not in favor of that. And I know I've heard other people speak out about this on the school board and say certain things. Even my colleague Nanre makes it a point to say that she hates having to see a police officer when she goes and drops her child off at the high school. It doesn't make sense, and it's not something that I want for my child or anyone's children. Leslie Lang also says she's not in favor of SROs in schools. I don't think that it's appropriate, and I think there's other ways. And I think first we have to revamp the way the teachers view the students, because I'm pretty sure that the students that are being called out for the most disruptive behavior or being sent to the office of the principal are majority students of color. So when these same teachers are sitting in their implicit bias and they're directing their energy towards those students, and then these officers are going to be the ones that are going to handle it, like it's not something that adds up or needs to be in the school system. So no, I definitely don't agree. And I think that's that will honestly probably be the next thing in state college that people are really up in arms about, because we don't want officers in our schools around our children and anybody's children. I don't see the need. I taught preschool. I've been in school settings. I've never felt the need to get a police officer involved. Like, I've never felt that need. And I've had huge temper tantrums, fallouts, children with different mental disorders, and I've never felt the need to call an officer And these children will strike you, they will scream, they will bite, and I've still never felt the need to have an officer involved. So I don't see the necessity. Jaden.
I'm sorry, I keep raising my hand. You can tell that I'm a student because my reflex is always to raise my hand. I do this at my house too. This is a bit of a wordy question, but I'll try and condense it. So, I forget who mentioned it, but someone mentioned about how, maybe it was you, maybe it was one of the people you interviewed, but they mentioned that Black people are often, when they speak white or they don't speak with slang, they're called articulate and they don't speak in AAVE. I've gotten that comment a lot. I'm sure you have also. I just didn't grow up in the city. I didn't grow up around people who spoke like that, so I never inherited that way of speaking. But something I notice is that it's almost a sort of new minstrelsy that I see in theater and TV and movies, where a lot of Black actors sound like me or they sound like you. They don't speak with AAVE. They don't speak with slang. They don't have that, what people like to call a hood accent or black accent or whatever. But the characters that they play will have it. Or those people, I'm sure they grew up and they heard you talk more Black, or you talk too white or something like that. And the director will be like, can you sound more urban? Can you sound more Black? Like, can you sound more like a gangster or whatever? So do you think that it's sort of I mentioned it earlier, but like a sort of modern minstrelsy where we kind of have to put on this sort of performative, or maybe not minstrelsy, but this sort of like performative Blackness just to fit into a character trope?
I mean, honestly, you use the right word in my opinion. Minstrel is honestly where it would go. The thought in itself that Black people only speak a certain way is racist within itself. The thought within itself that Black people are a monolith and we all came from the hood, or we all came from horrible backgrounds, or we all came from single parent homes, or we all came from a poor upbringing is fundamentally racist. Now, do a lot of my people go through these things? Yes, they do. And that is due to systematic racism. But to automatically assume that a person of color is going to speak in Ebonics is not only racist, it's very offensive. And then to turn to them and say, oh, you are so articulate, or you are so well-spoken, it is implying that you assumed that they wouldn't be based off of their makeup. It is a issue. It is a problem. It is very offensive to go to a casting call and someone tell you to be more Black, as if your Blackness isn't enough within itself, as if your Blackness is connected to your accent or your slang, right? And a lot of us, we code switch, right? That's just what we do, because we know that in the work world or in the professional world, I can't use as much slang. I can't speak in the way that I would just speak to maybe my Black comrades or friends, because I will be seen as ignorant or not well read or something of that sort. And so a lot of us have been forced to code switch and put on just in our everyday lives, right? And it is very taxing. It's very frustrating. And I feel like it's in more ways than just the way we speak, right? A lot of times you don't see Black professionals on television with natural hair, right? Or especially the men, right? They all have to cut their hair off. You definitely don't see anyone with hair like mine in the professional setting, because for some reason our hair seemed unprofessional. And this grows out of my head. So to tell me that the way my hair grows is unprofessional is fundamentally racist, because you're saying that you are, or the European is the standard of professionalism, right? It is the standard of speaking. And if we look at the English language, it is the most backward language out of all of them. It is highly confusing. It is extremely wrong. And people who speak proper English live in London. They don't live here. So it's amazing on how we're required to be at a certain standard that's not even really the standard. It's just an ideology. It's just this make-believe fairy tale land. I mean, and to African Americans have worked extremely hard, right? We came from a position where we were not allowed to even read. Like, people were not just lynched and killed, but some people's eyes were burnt out for reading, right? And even through that, they were able to speak for themselves, write constitutions, get into law, all during times where they technically really weren't allowed to read in certain places and really weren't allowed to progress. And so to think that someone who doesn't speak quote unquote proper English is ignorant is also fundamentally racist. Someone doesn't have to speak in the way you do to be intelligent or to know what you're talking about and be able to respond. So I think that we as people need to be very open-minded and understanding that people come from all areas, and just because they don't articulate something in the most profound way doesn't mean what they're saying can't be profound. So let's see. I'm reading what Leslie wrote, and she says the most recent issue for the school board to address is the fact that they held an assembly to introduce diversity, equity, and inclusion terms over a TED Talk interview, and the high school allows students to opt out. We do not get to have the SCASD expose values of inclusion and allow students to opt out of the community. I think that's a big problem. I think it's a problem when people can opt out of Black history or opt out of diversity. Black history is all of our history. America is diverse. To be able to opt out of those things, I think it's fundamentally a problem, because when you have parents that'll take children and they'll opt them out of certain things, then that puts in the child's mind that this is not really important or this is not necessary. And so then they grow up with that same ideology, and then we're just really perpetuating that racist and prejudice cycle that we really don't need to. I want it. Let's see. Yep. It's definitely it's always a requirement. Yes. It's always a requirement. The hiring of the director for the diversity. Yes, exactly. Exactly. And a lot of times that happens with us, unfortunately. A lot of times we're put in positions where people are they just need to meet their status quo, right? They just need to interview so many Black people, or they need to say they spoke to so many Black people, or they just hire this Black person to put in this position. Okay, now all the racism is okay now because this Black person is hired, or we did this and we went through this training, and the root of the problem is never truly fixed. And so they just try to put this superficial Band-Aid because they have one Black person in this position and all the racism should go away, or they're not racist because this one Black person is in this position. And that also is a fundamental problem. White institutions, white leadership, white politicians, white teachers need to stop using Black people as token chips. We're not your token person in this space. So to say that you aren't racist or you aren't falling under white supremacy or racist model, that it doesn't work that way, period. Music theory and appreciation in the U.S. focuses on Bach, Mozart, Wagner, while blues and jazz is an afterthought. Yeah, that's a whole nother story. Angela Davis spoke on jazz yesterday. But yeah, that's a whole nother story. Jaden?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry to take up more time. You just know so much and I have so many questions. So kind of in response to what you just said, where do you think the line is between tokenism and actual representation? Because I've noticed on CNN, they're starting to have more Black anchors, for example. Like you have Abby King. I think she was there before, but she definitely she's new, but she's also young, so that may be a little different. But there's a new Black anchor that I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but he's also new, but he's a little older. So where do you think the line is between we want to actually represent and we want to actually change and have more representation of people of color and Black people and whatnot versus tokenism?
You know what? That's actually kind of hard because it's a thin line, right? And that's where people are able to kind of swivel over it, right? For instance, I'll say this. Candace Owens is Black, but she doesn't represent me or the struggles that I adhere to, right? So if someone were to say that they got Candace Owens in this position and to speak for Black people, that would be false, right? Because it's clear based off her ideologies and what she says that it doesn't align with what the Black community is speaking for. So the same way they got maybe Melanie or Nanre would be able to say it for me better, the Black speaker who came and basically tried to make the Osaze case seem like it was nothing, but they went and found a Black person, a Black body to do that. So sometimes people are like using Black bodies to kind of shield over the racism. And I think that's different than actually hiring someone who is Black and getting information from them to make the entire group or the entire situation better, and then working on breaking down the racial nuances within that system, and also looking towards more people of color, right? And also trying to find a way. So yes, if you're the first person there, you might feel like the token, but the question is, how many more people of color are they actually trying to get in this space? How much are they actually trying to listen to what you're saying or the issues you're bringing up? And how much is it okay, we'll deal with that whenever, or we'll talk about that in February, right? Well, like, how much of that is actually happening? Does that make sense? Yeah,
it does. So you're saying that it's more of the intention of the hiring, and maybe even so far as the actual person that they hire. You mentioned Candace Owens. Okay.
Yeah, because I'm from the South, and sometimes once again, all Black people are not a monolith, right? So I'm not Candace Owens is allowed to have whatever opinion she wants to have, because this is America and it's free speech. But when we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and what Black people are fighting for, she doesn't align with that. So simply because she's Black doesn't mean that she will speak for Black people and actually fight in the interest of what people out there in the streets are fighting for, if that makes sense. So just because it's so many different levels to it, and it's so many different things, but it's hard to figure that out. Just like it's hard to prove that, it's hard to prove racism within the workplace. It's hard to prove that kind of thing because you have to prove that someone had the intent. So it's easier to prove other discriminatory things, but it's very hard to prove this because there's always so much gray area that and so much wording that people are able to slip through. And the problem is we need to break that down and be very clear and very precise. And that way, when people are entering these spaces, they're not going through these types of situations. Heritage Affairs section of the PA State Police. There we go. Okay, like I know I'm like at 105, but I'm willing to answer one more question if Chanel doesn't mind. No? Okay, I'm willing to answer one more question before we go. And I really want to thank everyone who stayed and rocked it out. This is awesome. I really appreciate everyone who is here. No questions, comments. Thank you all for all of you all chatting in the chat. That's funny. Okay, no more questions? Okay, well, I truly thank you, Kiana. I truly want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank again the Department of Geography, Academia and Activism series. This has been really great. I really was glad to put this clip together. I'm really glad to sit and talk to you all. And I hope that I'm able to see you all in other spaces. If any of you all live in Ferguson, I'm running for Ferguson Township Supervisor. So give me a vote. And my stuff on YouTube and Facebook, you all are welcome to email me or anything like that. Thank you all so much for being here and having me.